Hello and welcome back to the J&Z podcast. Today we're going to be talking about, for our second time, but for your first time, the movie Pacific Rim. The movie that did not get heavily hit by networking issues upon its first recording.
My
It's an
bad.
inside joke. You wouldn't get it unless you were me and Zeth. But
Yeah, that's
me
true.
and Zeth both love this movie. It's probably my favorite monster film, personally, because they focus on the cool fighty robots instead of the big scary monsters, but don't neglect them either. And it's got a great story.
Hmm. I don't necessarily know about that, just because I'm such a big fan of the Heisei era of Godzilla. Um,
Is that the one where he does that backflip onto King Kong or Mothra or
no, that's
whoever?
the Showa. That's the Showa era. That's like the classic Godzilla. But like the middle era, where it's like Biollante and Space Godzilla and Destroyer, like those are the best Godzilla movies in my opinion. And Pacific Rim is great. It's really, really good. Like it brought back the kaiju genre because there was this time in history when, it was those 10 years when Godzilla went into hiding again after Final Wars. That's when there was no kaiju movies, and all of a sudden Pacific Rim comes out, and it's like, whoa, kaiju's can be cool again, and it gets everybody involved. And Godzilla comes out next year with his reboot after this, and then King Kong comes back, and everybody, the kaiju craze is once again popular.
Yeah, and I must say, it did a great job convincing me of its potential. The movie itself, I think it does a ton of things right. And I mean, I have a couple nitpicks, but just in general, the way it presents how they fight and everything, the story behind it, it makes sense and it has some compelling moments that I feel like a lot of movies kind of lack. That's actually been a big problem I found in a lot of movies is that they try to play up bigger moments of like character death or character growth, but they never actually invest the time in the movie to make me care enough about the character. And I'm not saying this is some masterclass of just like emotional dialogue or whatever, but it has some like genuinely heartfelt scenes, some kind of like, that makes you feel stuff. I just feel like for a monster movie of all things, it does a great job just showing how the characters are willing to sacrifice how they grew up and how they deal with loss. And it all kind of comes back to the whole like neurological link thing and how they pilot the mechs. So it's more than just big robots fighting monsters, and I think it goes a long way in the movie.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you where the entire story was very, very good. But I mean, as the years have gone by, I just really like the monster scenes now. I'm not so much involved with the humans. Now, there's nothing really wrong with the humans, but I don't think the story is as entertaining as one of the other Godzilla movies. And it was fine for the time. Like, it was exactly what we needed when um, the kaiju genre was non-existent. Like when this came out, it was such a big deal because the story was good, the characters were good, the action was on point. But going back to it now, I think it's better than all of the legendary Godzilla films.
Hmm.
But the characters in the story aren't my favorite. I really don't care for Mako or the main guy. Uh, I mostly like Charlie's character and his friend, and his little scientist friend, as well as Idris Elba's character.
I was gonna
Those
say
three
I do
characters are
remember
my
those
favorite.
guys, especially Idris Elba, the most. He was just kind of a cool dude in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
but and it's been a minute since I've seen it. I just remember the movie so well that I just watched it so many times that maybe I should have probably given it a little bit of a rewatch more recently than I have. But I just remember, especially for the time, being somewhat compelling. For especially again for just a relatively monster movie that's based around action and monsters. I feel it more than did enough to justify the fights happening and various conflicts.
Yeah, and I think that's great because that's the point I tried to make in my one Pacific Rim video where I said now this movie is a perfect kind of entry level movie for people like you who didn't, probably watch Godzilla growing up. So, you know, when you think of giant monster movies, you think of guys in rubber suits. And then, you go to this movie where it's all entirely CGI, but the CGI is fantastic. This movie is what, almost 10 years old and, or
I
maybe
believe it
even
still holds up.
15. Yeah, the CGI is fantastic.
The whole And it's not just how they look. I remember exactly why the movie was so much fun, and it really comes down to the fights themselves, especially the one in the city. They have a way with how everything moves that it both feels like big clunky machines, but also that things have a lot of impact and things move quick enough to where it's not like weird, like almost a slow-mo. Like, they nailed the movements of large scale, like, mechs and monsters in a way that feels, like, very realistic and natural, like how they would act in, like, suits designed for battle. That was always a cool highlight, and it made the fights feel that much better.
Yeah, and that was pretty unique when we were first watching it because if you remember the Godzilla films that I don't know if you've watched the ones with Mechagodzilla or not, but for the majority of the Godzilla films, whether it be Mogira or Mechagodzilla, usually the way they pilot them is not the way that it's portrayed in this movie. They're piloted either outside from like maybe a ship or a base, or if they're inside the mech, it's with a bunch of buttons and a control pad, sort of like a Voltron. It's not like this where it's like this big VR rig suit where you're able to touch the buttons, but you're doing the actions. When you swing your arm, the mech swings its arm, and it's so cool because it it takes a lot of momentum to do that and strength. So like I love it in the beginning when they go to punch the one kaiju with like a large nose and it shows them like exerting all that force like they're yelling like ah, and then it shows
Mhm.
their fist and then it shows the kaiju's fist, and everything has impact, but it feels like everything has weight to it.
It does, and I think that the inclusion of the 2 people, it introduces both the fact that their lives are on the line when they're fighting these things, and also that those 2 people have to be in sync was a big part of the movie, and it added something to the human side of things beyond, it wasn't, like, crazy. I know that was a big part of it, but it added just a little something to create some conflict or some common goal between the 2 main protagonists and the other people, to where it's not just a surface level relationship or whatever. She's not just some, like, damsel in distress or just something like what you'd find normally. The fact that these two strangers against all odds kind of have to go, figure each other out to an extent, it adds a certain level of something else that can go wrong on their sides. Like what if one of them starts drifting? What if they're just not in sync? It kind of adds that whole heroic, oh, they finally did it.
Yeah, no,
Beyond just the fight.
it's exciting because it's not just normal people can all of a sudden get into a mech and pilot it. You have to be uh, compatible, first of all, with your partner that you're with, but you also need to not chase the rabbit, as they say in the movie. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, the characters that are piloting these mechs, they're not just random people that are grouped up with one another, like in the second movie, which I hated. In this movie, you have uh, I always forget the main character's name, but him and
Oh,
his
I don't
brother,
remember.
yeah, him and his brother are in the beginning, so that makes sense with their relationship.
Yeah,
Later
they're
on in
great
the
because they're
movie,
brothers.
yeah, later on in the movie when it's all these other pilots that you're meeting, one of them is the dad and his son. Another one is a guy and his wife, and then the other one it's like triplets. So every single guy here uh, has it makes sense in the story purpose where they're like, okay, not everyone can do this. Okay, why? And then when they explain the whole drift thing, I mean, that was really unique too. Nothing like that had been done before either.
If you think back to something like the movie 65, for instance, there was a lot of sci-fi elements that just were like his gun was just kind of a gun, but like a space gun. They never add anything besides what's like the most superficial, whatever you think of if you think of sci-fi, or just they blatantly don't even try. That's an example of a movie that doesn't do much extra. But rarely do you get to see kind of a cool idea like that actually being implemented. Besides, like it just doesn't come up that often. I like when they introduce like unusual concepts that you haven't really seen before, and I feel like that really added to the futuristic sci-fi setting as something that could be a conflict. And I just feel like it was a great addition. I appreciate that it was creative more than anything else. It was something that we haven't seen before, and I haven't really seen much since then. But it's kind of the movie's thing.
No, I get what you're saying, and one thing that I really like about its creativity that not a lot of people talk about when they talk about this movie is that all the mechs have personalities compared to the kaiju. Uh, the mechs have logos and stickers on them, as well as looking torn up and beat up, as well as different body types and how their weapons are. So one has like its chest opens up with like 50 rockets that come out. Another one just has really big hands and can beat the snot out of a kaiju that way. And then, our main Jaeger, Gypsy Danger, has a sword as well as the plasma bolt. But I just love how all of the mechs were so unique. It wasn't like a Voltron situation or a Power Rangers situation where it's like, hey, they're different animals or they're just different colors. Um, to that
No, they
extent,
made
and
the mechs really cool.
yeah, and that goes with the CGI where it just looks so realistic. Like metal, we have been great with CGI for a long time. You think back to Iron Man in 2008. That looks realistic still to this day. Metal has been something that has always looked good with CGI now for the longest time. The problem with CGI for a lot of things was flesh and blood. And that goes for the kaijus. I think these kaijus still look better than anything of the legendary Godzilla films. It looks better than the
Hmm.
2014 one. It looks better than the Godzilla versus Kong, and that's because of the colors they chose. They chose very dark colors, and so all of the kaiju have this rubbery, hide texture to them all.
I agree. They were very believable to as much as a big old monster could be. They still are monsters. It's still, you have to have a certain level of disassociation, I guess. But the way that played into the futuristic city, I feel like we all remember the fight in the city. That was probably one of the better points. The
When he
movie,
grabs a boat, that thing was
when he grabs a
awesome.
boat, and it's in the way they kind of animate the city almost. They do a great job blending what would be the future, but in more of a like decrepit kind of way. So there's like designated kaiju stations that add some tension when everyone's huddled underneath the ground. And it's just kind of neat watching him like not try to destroy the buildings to as much as he can.
hmm
And then also watching the kaijus just jump through the building was sweet. The whole fight there was very cool. And again, the boat. Yeah. That was very cool.
Yeah, just the amount of ways that they took advantage of the environment. I cannot stand it with any fight, whether you're a kaiju in a mech, or two kaiju, or even just a normal human on human battle. Why is the fight taking place in this environment? A lot of those times they don't take advantage of those environments that they're in. So, something like, for instance, in the second fight, like you were talking about in the city, they're in the shipping cargo area. And so they're picking up the cargo areas and they're punching the one kaiju in the face with these giant crates and stuff like that they're holding. The one
Mhm.
kaiju like whips a crane out and just smashes the face. So every single one takes advantage of the environment. Same thing with like the first fight in the water. All the punches, they're going through the waves, so like they have to exert a lot more force than usual. Same thing with the other kaiju.
Mhm.
The boat, like they have to save the boat, so like one arm's preoccupied
They
while
gotta
the other
lift
one's
it.
trying to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So every single one takes advantage of the environment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's such a good decision on their part. And it's not played off as some like kind of like if it was in a Marvel movie, it would just be like, "You who look at me," and then he'd like smack him in the face. Like this was genuinely like the way that they incorporated it into the fight in a serious way, where it was pretty cool. They didn't try to make a big deal out of the fact either, which really just helped the fights be even more natural. They incorporated it, what is going to be a more natural feeling fight in a way that doesn't draw attention to itself like a lot of other movies would kind of self grandiorize. I don't know what the best word is, but like just kind of pat itself on the back for doing. I like that they took it all very seriously and just tried to make it the coolest, most realistic fight they could in that scenario.
Yeah, like, you know, when we were watching this movie, when we were going to watch this movie, it could have gone very, very badly. And that's mostly how you get Pacific Rim 2. And that's a good example of how Pacific Rim 1 could have been like this dumb, bad movie.
I have not seen it, but we might want to make a podcast on it. We'll just have to
Oh man,
see.
I don't want to ever see it again or even mention it again. But the reason that we were kind of scared when this movie was coming out was it looked amazing. The trailers looked awesome. I remember when I first saw the trailer, I still do. Me and my mom, we were going to go see The Hobbit Part 1. And the
Hmm.
bad thing is, I was super excited for the movie, but the bad thing is she wanted me to sit down in one of the first rows. And I can't stand that with movies. I want to be in the middle or somewhere where I can view the entire screen without having to look back and forth at the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a pretty bitter mood when the trailers were starting. And then all of a sudden, Pacific Rim plays. And at first, it tricked me because I thought it was the new Godzilla trailer. And because all you see are people just running from in the trailer and like saying, "Oh, there's a kaiju." So I'm like, "Oh, it's Godzilla." Like I'm freaking out in the theater. I'm like shaking my mom. I'm like, "Look it, look it, look it." So all of a sudden it shows that one shot of the mech getting thrown across the bridge. And then it cuts to Pacific Rim and I was just like, "Oh, I'm seeing that day one." And then, it was exciting, but the bad thing about that was while it looked great, America did not have a great track record of making good monster films
Hmm.
or taking them serious. So, for instance, this movie you were saying it takes its fights serious, it takes its story serious, it takes the world serious. The best example that we had to point to that this could be a bad movie was the Roland Emmerich Godzilla movie, the one with Matthew Broderick.
Oh, brother.
It's, they trashed Godzilla first of all. The jokes were not they tried to make it a jokey, with serious so
That that was atrocious.
yeah,
That was bad.
so we saw what it could have been and luckily it wasn't. Like when we got to the theater, at first we were a little worried because we were the only ones in our theater. We saw it day 1. We were the only ones in our theater except for one guy who said, or maybe we didn't see it day 1 because the guy in front of us said he had seen it up to that point 3 times.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, so my mistake. We didn't see it day 1, but the guy in front of us was like such a big fan because we were talking to him about Godzilla movies and stuff, and then he's like, "Don't worry, this movie is amazing. I've already seen it 3 times." It was just really really great.
Yeah, no, and I remember when I walked out of the movie theater, I watched it with, some friends, and I remember thinking it was great. And that opinion never changed. I rewatched it once it came out on digital or whatever. I rewatched it plenty of times. I'll always have a fond memory of this movie. Um, I just love the creative ideas behind it, and I like the cool action, and especially a younger me could not ask for more out of a movie. And I wish they made more kind of stuff like this nowadays too.
Yeah. No, I just I'm very grateful that this movie came out because we probably would have been still in the hiatus of kaiju movies if this didn't come out. I think Godzilla was in production at the time, so possibly that could have changed, but this really like it didn't do good in US theaters. It did really good in China and like uh, markets from across the world. But once it came to DVD and Blu-ray and VOD, that's when it like started to pick up pace. And you look up, videos of this movie, people just praise it to death now. It's a cult classic basically.
Yeah, and I can see why. And yeah, I just it is just a pretty good movie. I really enjoyed it, and I will
Yeah.
continue to enjoy it.
We're
And
not
I
reviewing the second movie, Jace.
Okay, you get to pick. We can either review the second movie or we can review the movie Atlantic Rim.
Okay, we'll review the second movie.
That's what I thought.
I've
I have
already
no
watched
idea.
Atlantic Rim.
Did ya? I don't know anything about it. I just know it exists. Are
Or actually, wait a minute. Atlantic Rim was not as bad.
you joking?
Uh,
The
I
B
don't
movie
know.
ripoff of what is a B movie studios movie?
I
Or
don't
who made
know. I
this?
just I just remember with the second movie, uh I was very excited. I think I was very excited. But there was something in the back of my mind that was like, okay, trailers aren't amazing, but it's Pacific Rim, they can't really mess it up too bad. They quite literally trample on every single thing that the first movie sets up. So like Newt's the bad guy, Charlie, he's the villain.
I heard some interesting things about his character development, but I'm not going to get into
Yeah, like he's
them.
he's having some fun with the kaiju brain. So
Yep.
the mechs have no weight now whatsoever. They're jumping and they're spinning and they're doing like these Power Ranger moves. You've
Oh, do
got
they put the five keys together and make like Pacific Rim Voltron? That'd be really
no, but the
cool.
monsters do. The monsters are like three at the end and then they combine into one giant one
That is
due to
so
like
stupid.
aliens coming out of the ground. Like Charlie's like, "Oh, okay. We'll got this." And he like taps something on his iPad and like all of a sudden these little aliens come out and they form this giant it's so stupid.
That sounds so bad. It sounds awesome.
And then you have like the next generation. So like it ends up being that like Newt implanted kaiju brains into Jaegers, and that's why Jaegers
Oh,
now are bad.
brother.
And they're training these new recruits that are kids basically. They're like 16, 15-year olds. And all of a sudden at the end, all of the experienced Jaeger pilots die. And they're like, what are we gonna do? And then it's like the dramatic music plays, and then like it shows all the younger pilots like suiting up. They're like dun dun dun. And then all of a sudden all the younger pilots are there kicking butt and they have like no training. Like it's established in the movie they have almost zero training in a Jaeger, and they go into a Jaeger and they're like, "Oh, this is fun."
Oh, but goody.
It's so bad. It was so bad. I've never been more embarrassed going to a movie in the theater.
I remember back when it was coming out, and I was like, "Oh, this should be fun." That first movie was amazing. I want to see what they do next. And the movie came out. I looked at the Metacritic scores, and I never even bothered. I was
Yeah,
so disappointed. I didn't even want to give it the time of day. But now it sounds like it's so bad that it's
no, it's not
disrespectful,
even funny.
which
It was
is
just
funny.
bad. Like it's nothing but trouble bad.
Yeah, but come on, the three of them merging. That sounds so stinking funny.
It wasn't funny. Like the way
It's
I'm
not meant to
describing
be,
it is
but
funny, but
isn't that the truth?
oh
Like that's
man.
how it always is. It's always way funnier when you describe it than what actually happens.
Yes, and like Mako, like the main turning point in the first movie, the main catalyst for like Idris Elba to join the fight again, and she dies in a helicopter accident in like the first 20 minutes of the movie.
That's just sounds like Squidward explaining to Squilliam. It's like they died in a marching accident. Like that's just so such a stupid way to die in that sense. Like they just from what? Did a kaiju attack it or did it just
No, oh gosh. Okay, so like the Gypsy Danger is like trying to be there. I think as like an example or something like that at this parade, and all of a sudden a bad Jaeger comes out of the water, and it's a black Jaeger, and it's got 2 swords now because Gypsy Danger throws out the sword, and the black Jaeger throws out 2 swords. It's just so bad. And then all of a sudden, the black Jaeger, I think, like, shoots some missiles or something like that, and one of them clips the helicopter. I could be wrong. I haven't seen it since I went to the theater, but it was just so bad. Like,
That does sound terrible.
I went and I took one of my friends, and I took dad, and, like, in the first 20 minutes, both of them leaned over to me and said, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen in the theater." In the opening 20 minutes.
Come on, man, you're
And we
selling it
had
to
to
me too
sit
much.
there for an hour and a half or 2 hours and just watch it play out. Oh, it was such a pile of garbage.
Oh, that is awesome. That is so bad though.
But
But
but you can see what the first movie could have by watching the second movie. Like,
yeah, well, the
the
first
first
movie is yeah.
yeah, like, the first movie could have easily been the second movie, and thank goodness it wasn't, but I'm never watching that sequel again, Jace, sorry. We'll
Darn
watch
it.
Atlantic Rim. Atlantic Rim's more better.
Atlantic Rim. That's where
Yeah.
all the homies congregated after that mess. So
Asylum Films, we're coming for you.
I want to see their other catalog. I'll have to look it up after. But
Ape
we've
versus
gotten
Lizard.
That's awesome. We've gotten so off track though, but I'm not mad for it.